My name is Erin Colburn. I'm the Pre-Health Advising Coordinator for the College of Health Sciences. Today, we are here to talk about another component of the application process for applying to professional schools and graduate schools. Some of the biggest issues that students run into is letters of recommendation, and all of the ins and outs of that we're going to cover tonight. It is with my excited enjoyment that I get to introduce Kelly Gould from the Career Center at Career Services at Boise State University. She is a career success counselor. And
all right, so resumes, we all hear about them. Hopefully most of us have them. But if you don't, that's what we're here for. So yeah, my name is Kelly Gould. I'm a career counselor with Career Services. I've been with Boise State for probably about 3 years now, loving every minute of it. And I've been working with health sciences for probably about the same, but I'm also a generalist, so I see all students and have a good idea of what can go into resumes from all different walks of life and different industries. So today's goals are to discuss how resumes will help you as you're applying to medical school. So the why do you need this piece of this, the importance of targeting your resume to either your program, your field, your school, things like that. And then we're also going to discuss how to make your resume stand out, all within 15 minutes. So it's a really well-packed presentation. All right, so why am I making you do this? So your resume will usually provide you with solid content for your AMCAS work and activity section, and it's usually part of the secondary app. So resumes are going to be helpful on every aspect of your application. And it also gives you a good idea as to what experiences matter for you. What have you done? Where have you worked? Where have you job shadowed? All that kind of stuff. It gives you a nice overview of yourself. It's kind of like your own cheat sheet for yourself. And also, okay. Yeah, and it also helps to give a resume to those who are writing your letters of recommendation, especially if they're faculty members or people who are working with massive amounts of students. It's going to be hard for them to remember every single aspect of you. So it's okay for you to give them a resume to have them, to help them as they're building their content around you and why they would recommend you to a medical program. Okay, and for reflection, as I mentioned, it's your cheat sheet of you so that you can have all of your skills, experiences, abilities all in one place, and so that your medical school application committee can really see everything that you've done really easily and really well. So resumes are going to be subjective. They're from your perspective, they're from your experience. So every single person in this room will have a different resume. So you're going to have different classes, different majors, different projects, different volunteering, different experiences like shadowing, internships, jobs, etc. And your reflection on your experience dictates the content of your resume. So this is how you make your resume stand out, is through your content. There's no singular correct way to do a resume or to create a resume. And the importance comes from targeting the resume to your specific goal. As well as how you are expressing yourself and marketing yourself towards that specific goal. So they can really look like anything. Generally, we recommend this type of formatting just because you can see how clear it is, how easy it is to see everything on first glance. And that's kind of the goal that you want within your resume. How you do that is kind of up to you. And so a resume, for tip number 1 here, your resume is not your professional biography. So it's not a whole work history of you. It's targeted. It's really making sure that it's including the things that are relevant and that those are the first thing that people are seeing when they look at your resume. So the best resume is the one that most closely matches the job description or the goal in mind. So what you want to think to yourself is, what content can I include to help demonstrate my qualifications to enter the medical school and the medical profession? And ways to figure out what's important to these schools and these programs is to do your research. So look at their program websites, look at their applications, really make sure that you're getting the keywords of like their competencies that they're looking for and things like that through your research. All right. So what usually goes on a resume? These are probably the three core things that you want to really make sure are looking good. So you have your heading, which is usually your name, your phone, your email address, sometimes the city and state and where you live, but that's not super necessary anymore. And then your education. So that's going to be where you're like, hey, I have a degree. Look at me. I have a bachelor's degree. So they know that right away. And then your experience. And that's probably where you're going to be focusing the most. So your header section will usually include your name, your phone number, your email. If you have a LinkedIn, you can put your LinkedIn URL here, your changed LinkedIn URL. So go on to your LinkedIn and change your URL to something more normal and not Kelly Gould 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Like you don't want numbers within your LinkedIn URL as much as you can prevent that. And if you have a portfolio URL too, that can be really helpful to include on your resume as well, just so people can see some work that you've done. So say you've maybe done a lot of volunteer work at a local clinic. If you have any projects that you did there that marketed your services or anything like that, all that could go into a portfolio. All right, and these are just some examples of what a header could look like. I usually like the whole kind of name and then phone and email on the same line just because it takes up a little less space. But really, like I said, there's lots of different ways that you could do it. You can do it in the center of the page. You can do it on the left. It's kind of, you can play around with it, be creative in it. I know there's not too many ways to be creative, but this is one of the ways that you could. Is by your name placement, how you kind of express your name on your resume, and all of that good stuff. All right, so your education section, you want to list your most recent degree first, so probably your degree from Boise State. And usually how you would do that is you would say Bachelor of Science in Biology. And then you would say emphasis in cellular and molecular biology or something like that. That's a long one, so good luck putting that one on your resume, but that's okay. And so you would want to say the whole thing and not just BS in biology or degree in biology. You want the whole proper name of your degree. And then across on the same line, you would have your anticipated graduation date. So if it's this year, you would say expected May 2021. And then underneath your degree, you can have either your minors, your certificates, things like that, or just the name of the school. So Boise State University, Boise, Idaho. And then you can also have your minors or emphases as bullet points underneath your education as well. All right, and then your GPA, this is a question that we get a lot. You can put it on your resume if you want to. For your like medical school application, you probably wouldn't have to just because you're already sending in your transcripts and all that kind of stuff. It's taking up space, so you don't necessarily need that. But for your letters of rec, it could be helpful to include your GPA, especially if it's like probably above a 3.6. Anything that's kind of excellent or above can go on your resume and could be really helpful for your letters of rec, just to get an alternate view of the work that you've done, especially if you're balancing multiple experiences, job shadowing, internships, plus getting fantastic grades. So lots of good things there. Any academic honors or licenses or certificates. So if you got like Dean's List for a few semesters, that can go underneath education. Any sort of merit-based scholarship. So sometimes WUI could go under here if you're part of WUI. Yeah, really anything that you're particularly proud of could potentially go within education. And then relevant coursework. So this is only if there isn't really a better spot for them. So on the AMCAS, there's probably a place for it and they see it on your transcripts as well. So you might not necessarily need to take up that space on your resume. And finally, if you have your high school on your resume, please take that off. You're in college, you're almost graduating college. So they assume that you have that high school diploma or that GED, whatever you need. All right, so here's an example of what that education could look like. So here we see it fully spelled out, Bachelor of Arts in Public Relations, and this is for somebody who had a double major. So if you double majored, this is how you can do that as well. So Bachelor of Science in Biology, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, something like that. All right, so moving on to experience. What counts as experience? So experience can be anything that demonstrates your competencies and readiness to enter medical school or the medical profession. So it can literally be anything. You have jobs, internships, volunteer experiences, service learning projects, extracurricular activities. So maybe say you are part of a student group that is working primarily for let's see, what's a good medical student group? I have no idea, but that volunteers at the Red Cross or something like that. That would count as experience. Woo. Okay. Study abroad. That's awesome because that's a lot of multicultural experience, like stepping out of your comfort zone, all of that kind of stuff. Any research that you've done. So this can be with faculty, major class projects, or even independent research that you maybe have done kind of on your own. Oops, 1 second. Okay, perfect. And then we have class projects. So if you've done any solid research or class projects within your service learning classes or anything like that, you could throw that on here, as well as job shadowing experience. Okay, let's see. I'll go through this and then I'll kind of work towards wrapping it up a little here because I know I'm at the 15-minute mark almost. But how to categorize your experience. So relevant experience doesn't have to be your only header option for experience or work experience. I don't even see relevant experience half the time on people's first drafts of resumes. It's always work experience. And then it's like the rec center and McDonald's and like some local restaurant. And then at the very bottom, it's like, oh yeah, and I volunteered at St. Alphonsus. And it's like, okay, come on, put the relevant stuff above. But so relevant experience or work experience doesn't have to be your only header option. So experience can be categorized into different categories. So you can gather things together that are more relevant and more targeted to really target your experience. So here as an example, we have healthcare experience and exposure. So that in that you could include your shadowing, your hospital volunteer experience, scribing, anything, or like maybe you served as a medical assistant for a while. And then you can have another header that's campus leadership. So future physicians, dance marathon, anything that has to, not necessarily anything that has to do with the medical field specifically, but this is leadership. Like this is showing just where you've taken initiative on campus. And then you can have a customer service heading if you want to. So that's where your more standard jobs would go. Working at on-campus positions, things like that, because it still matters. It's still helpful. And it's at the bottom of your resume because it's not quite as relevant as that medical experience, that healthcare experience that you're getting. And then you can also include any skills and abilities that you might have as a heading section if you want to. So that's where you can really explicitly say, hey, these are the technical skills that I have. As long as you were showing that within your experiences too, and not only saying that you have those skills, but also describing how you've used those skills within your experiences. Okay, so the bare minimum of what you need for the experience section: job title, name of the company, city, state, dates employed. So, and this is going to look pretty much exactly like, I would say, when in doubt, do the formatting like you would with your education. So you would have your job title highlighted more so than the location, because that's how you're doing your degree. You're highlighting the degree more so than where you got the degree. And then you have the organization name, the city, the state, and then your start and end date. And ideally, that's going to be September spelled out 2020 to whatever month this is, March 2021 spelled out, not just the numbers. And that's just for look's sake, purely aesthetic reasons, just because it looks a little bit more put together. And then your content of your experiences is where you can go into those details about those skills, what I mentioned in the last slide, how you use those skills rather than just those skills. So you would have a little bit of a description of the relevant task, the skills used, and the outcomes, or I like to call it the what, the how, and the why. So you have the what, which is your action verb or your relevant task, your how, which is your skills used, and then your outcomes, which is the why or the purpose of what you were doing. Yeah, and if you need any more help with this, I know this is complicated, so come to us, we'll help you. Okay, and then you can even, like, if for specific medical healthcare related things, you could potentially put your hours in as well. That can be really helpful, and you'll probably have to put that in your AMCAS anyway. Good to have that all in one place. And then you have your customer service positions further at the end, and you'll see here that they don't describe what they did here. And you don't necessarily have to do that for the positions that aren't as relevant as, you know, maybe your internship or your volunteering. I'm going way over, so I'm sorry. But basically, you don't have to describe every single thing on your resume. And try and focus on your bullet points and really making sure that they are really hitting everything that you want them to hit. And you can target your bullet points too with specific phrases and words from the job description, from the program website, things like that. Okay, so this is all about creating bullet points, which I will not go through.
Would you be willing to share this PowerPoint with us and we can put it with the recording?
Yep, totally. I'll just go into resume length quick. So this is just like the formatting nitty gritty. Try not to go over 2 pages. Generally 1 is preferred for most industries, but for different places and different healthcare fields, it's going to be different depending on who's looking at your resume, which is annoying. But try not to go over 2 pages and try to keep it to 1 page as best as you can. And do whatever you can to make it fit. So shrink the margins. You can go as small as 0.5. I love 0.5. It's the first thing I do whenever I look at a student resume is I change the margins. And you can make the font size as small as 10 and go as high as 12, whatever you have room for. And change the spacing. I change the spacing all the time on mine. So just to fit things and make sure everything's squeezing in okay. And format your heading a little differently too. You can definitely conserve some space within your headings. Oh, excuse me. References. Do not put them on your resume. They just take up space. There's room for them elsewhere. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right. And to conclude, avoid errors. Have people look at it. Check for spelling. Check for grammar. Check for punctuation. Consistency is key with your resume. Let's see. So even 1 mistake can get your resume thrown out. So yes, have other people proofread. You have the resources, you have career services, you have health sciences advising. We're here for you. All right. And then really make sure that you are looking at this like an employer would, or like a admissions committee member would. Think like, okay, I didn't spell out bachelor's of science. What would somebody think of this? And then spell it out. You know, just think how they would think. And remember, consistency is key. That's my one takeaway that I want you to get from this is consistency is key. So if you're using periods for every sentence and then you miss 1 sentence and don't have a period, put a period there. I get that sometimes. All right, but that's it for me. Any questions?
What's the easiest way to schedule an appointment with you guys?
Oh, that's a great question, Shannon. Okay, so while I'm sharing my screen with you here, the easiest way to probably make an appointment with us would be through our website. So our website is boisestate.edu/career. And then when you get to that website, you'll be able to, let's see here, where's the easiest way? Right here, this online appointment. category, you can just click make an online appointment. And through this will take you to Handshake, where you can schedule a phone or video appointment with us. Yeah, good question. What else?
Well, I think that was really useful. Like I said, if we could have the slides, that would be awesome. And then we can distribute that with the information and we put it with the application cohort tile. Thank you so much for your time, Kelly. I know you have somewhere to be. So we really appreciate your efforts and sharing this information with us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It was great chatting with you all, and I'll definitely share those slides with you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So to break up the monotony of things, you're probably thinking to yourself, gosh, gee whiz, it's spring break should be here, but it's not quite here. So I'm going to turn the time over to Taylor Willis, our occupational therapy student at Boise State University, to talk a little bit about burnout.
Thanks, Erin. Like she said, I think a lot of us are starting to feel the symptoms of burnout or are even just more prone to it, right, of being students. And as we're in the application process and you guys are going to start going off into your professional schools, your professional programs, there is this big prevalence of healthcare burnout. And so this is a topic that's just not going to go away when school ends. It's going to continue as you continue into your career. And so I think it's a beneficial topic to talk about and to be aware of and to understand what you can do about it. And so what is burnout? It's a psychological syndrome that involves a prolonged response to a chronic interpersonal stressor on the job that can also be intertwined with school. And you're having feelings of being overextended and you feel depleted of your emotional and physical resources. And so some of the causes of it, which also can kind of be symptoms as well, is lack of control. You feel like you don't have control over your assignments. You feel like you don't have control over your schedule. You don't have control over multiple aspects that can be really damaging and can increase stress, right? Unclear job expectations. You're constantly just not 100% sure of yourself. You're not 100% sure of what you're really doing. That kind of goes along with a dysfunctional work dynamic. Sometimes that can be a relationship, but sometimes that can just be poor management and maybe you really just have no idea what you're doing that can influence it. Extremes of activities. And so if you are putting so much on yourself, like you're having such a big caseload or you're just waiting towards those end moments for those assignments, that can contribute to having these feelings of burnout. Lack of social support. So you're just not having anybody to talk to, or you feel like no one's really there for you. That can kind of be a possible cause, as well as just the work-life imbalance. So whether that's your ability to manage your time, or just the craziness of being a pre-professional student, and what comes with professional school and these future endeavors, that can really increase your risk of having it or feeling the symptoms. And so I think a big kind of distinction to go into is the difference between stress and burnout. I think burnout is just that extra level. It's sort of on that other end of the spectrum, that we've increased it so much. And so when we're feeling really stressed, you're identified by overengaged. You're overreactive, and you kind of have an hyperactivity kind of mindset. While burnout is completely on the other end. Burnout is actually characterized by disengagement. So you're kind of, your emotions are blunted, you're feeling helpless or hopeless. And that's a big distinction between the two. And so although we associate these things, I think stress can lead to burnout. But burnout really is on the end of the spectrum of when we're feeling kind of overworked and really feeling those symptoms. Like it. And so what can you do about it? I love this meme. You can do it if you believe it. False. You can do it if you do it, right? We have to take an active step. We can't just say, I'm not going to feel burnt out, right? We need to do something about it. And so I think this aligns with self-care. As we're moving into the healthcare field, I've kind of saw this phrase and I really appreciated it. All of your like ethical frameworks will always have the first little ethical dot is do no harm, right? But first, we have to do no harm to ourselves. We need to make sure that we're in a good place. We need to make sure we're in a good place physically, emotionally, to care for others, right? We're in a caring profession. And so it's important that we care for ourselves. And so that includes self compassion, right? Being kind to ourselves and not constantly criticizing or bringing us down, which can be challenging within professional school, as well as kind of this process, right? Of getting into those schools. That work life balance as you're starting to add more. Are we having time for leisure? Are we playing, right? Are we having a good time with our friends or our family? And then some organizational issues, I think that kind of goes with the balance. We need to make sure that we make time in our schedule for those things. Because if you don't have any time for self-care, then you're not going to participate in it, right?
Thank you so much, Taylor. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Well, thank you, Taylor. We're going to go ahead and move into the meat of the presentation tonight. Shannon and I are going to talk to you a little bit about letters of recommendation and how this all works. So how will you know who to ask? How do you know? I think that's some of the biggest questions that students often come to our office and ask is, how do I know it's the right person? And I think what's important for you to keep in mind is your schools, in terms of that each school is different in their expectations of letter writing. Some schools are very prescriptive. They have a precise list of exactly what they want. They say either a committee letter, or they say that they want a specific number of instructors. We use the University of Utah as an example. So they require 4 letters of recommendation, 2 academic, 1 non-science, and 1 science. 2 non-academic or supervisory letters where they saw where you were seen in a volunteer setting, a leadership setting, research, patient exposure, or observation. And so that's a very specific list. And so they know exactly how many they want. Idaho State University would be an example for PT schools. They require 2 letters from a PT and 1 academic or supervisory letter. There are schools that are more subjective in their expectations. And so you don't necessarily have to fuss with those ones as much as you do the prescriptive schools. But if you know your list of schools, you can go through the application process on the website and you can determine, are they a subjective school and they just want you to have a set of letters. So submitting a pre-medical committee evaluation, or 3 additional letters, or 3 letters where they speak to the following aspects. Some schools have limits on how many letters they'll accept, and some schools have a limit on how many that this is what they want, but they're willing to look at other letters as well. And so you kind of want to find some balance in between the subjective and the prescriptive. So we do think that to know who you ask, you need to know what you need. So if you haven't done that visual look at schools, gosh, that would be a first step for me. Is I would go look at the schools and find out exactly what kinds of letters I'm going to need. That allows you to also consider some aspects, individual letters. So Boise State University really kind of, that's where we're at. We do mostly individual letters. There is often on websites, it's a lot of times with pre-med or pre-dent, sometimes with pre-vet, what's called a committee letter. Many schools offer that as an option as an undergraduate school. Boise State University does not. So typically what ends up happening with schools that say they want a committee letter is they say they highly recommend or prefer it. And there's usually a little note that if your school doesn't provide a committee letter, that this is what they want. In my experience with schools that want a committee letter and we don't provide it, they usually want a pre-health advisor. That would be Shannon Kerr or myself, or either 2 science instructors or 1 faculty science instructor and a physician. So again, that committee letter is not something that we offer, and it's very common on a lot of pre-med websites, but hopefully that dispels some of the questions there. A pre-health advisor letter, not every school requires it. And, some students, they fret about maybe the relationship that they've built with myself or with Shannon. And so they think, gosh, I'm going to be in trouble. Well, I'm pretty relaxed and pretty laid back. And if you make an effort to come to meetings like this, if you make an effort to interact with me during advising, even if it's just like once a semester, I'm going to remember you. And so it's certainly something that can come up. There can be a request for a pre-health advisor, or it can be an academic advisor. So if you're majoring in something other than, say, health studies, like music or biology, and you have a very good relationship with your academic advisor in your major, that could be a really good example of a way for you to gain a letter. It doesn't fill the spot of a pre-health advisor letter, but it can be a really good example. So once you know kind of what you need from your schools and you know kind of what the typical types of letters are that you're going to ask for, you can start kind of cleaning your relationships. You need to take a step back and reflect and think, gosh, do I have a relationship with a science faculty, or do I have a relationship with an academic faculty, or do I have a relationship with a practitioner in the field that I'm interested in, someone who supervised me? You need to kind of start thinking about your relationships and what you have. But try not to make it too complicated. I think that a lot of times students think, gosh, I'm sitting in a classroom with 250 people. A lot of times the academic letter that's requested or required from a letter of recommendation from medical schools, while it is very beneficial and is a positive experience for you, that it supports your application, you need to realize that ask yourself some questions. Did I do well in this course? If I struggled, did it challenge me? And did I go see an instructor during office hours for support? Even if you were doing well, even if you're doing really well right now, are you going to office hours and interacting with the professor? Are you putting a name with a face? Are you maybe the first day of classes? Are you saying, gosh, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I really am excited to take your class. Did you take more than one course with them? I have more than often had students tell me, gosh, I don't think I can ask so-and-so, but I'm a learning assistant with them. Yes, you should ask that person, because even if you aren't interacting with them as much with COVID, you certainly are interacting with them. They're supervising you, and they can at least say that you've been doing a good job. So think about who speaks best to your attributes, who has the least seen them and seeing you at work, seeing you doing what you do, even if it's just your coursework, even if it's just your classroom stuff. So certainly, I think you need to have at least one or two of these things in the mix when you're going to ask or decide if you have a relationship. And start now. I mean, the semester's not over. If you have a class that you really, really enjoy, start going to office hours. Or reach out by email and say, gosh, I want to learn a little bit more about what you're researching in, or whatever it might be. If it's a supervisory letter or a letter that's not on the academic side, think about having coffee with those folks. So how to ask? And yes, you should ask. Please ask. So email certainly is a way. Don't ask directly via email, please, unless you have already started the conversation. So if you've already been having conversations back and forth, and now it's time to kind of just say, hey, we've been talking about maybe that you might be willing to write me a letter of recommendation, and I would like to have that happen. I think that would be okay. But what I would share with you is that the in-person experience is going to be so much better for you if you try to do that. So please use it as a last resort. But you can start the conversation with an email. You could say something like this. You could say, dear Professor M, I'm emailing you to see if we can set up some time. Maybe it's a Zoom session, maybe it's a phone call, or maybe it's an actual in-person meeting where you're at their office, or, maybe they're comfortable with a coffee, whatever it might be. Or you can meet them in the lab, or whatever it might be. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. Be clear. You should address them correctly. You should have a salutation. Dear so-and-so, and you should say sincerely. These are professional folks. They want to be treated as professional individuals. You're asking them for information. If you're asking for a professor, it is ideal to put your student ID number underneath your name. I would hope you would be doing that with your advisor as well, because you'd be surprised how many people have the same name as you. So the in-person is the most optimal. So after you set that email and they come back and they say, yeah, I'd be happy to meet with you by Zoom, or come join my office hours, or whatever it might be, then you can have that. I know it takes courage to speak with your professors sometimes, or even the practitioners you worked with. You understand how important these folks are. So make sure that you give them their due. In other words, treat them like you would want to be treated. If you would want to have an in-person conversation with somebody, if you would want that, strive for it. I know it's harder with COVID, but try anything, a Zoom session, a phone call, or if you can meet with them in person, that would be great. Make sure you thank them for the time that they've taught you. If they're one of your professors, or even if they're a practitioner that you've observed, thank them. Thank them for that time that they spent for you. Tell them how much you valued what you learned. Strike up a conversation with them. Make sure that you share with them what you're currently doing, that your future plans are to apply to ... and that you're so excited about that opportunity and that new goal. Then mention that you have to apply and that you need letters of recommendation. And then you can throw out the question, would you be willing and able to write a strong letter of recommendation on my behalf? That's as simple as it can be. It doesn't have to be rocket science, but I do think that if you treat it with positivity and excitement, that you're excited, you'd be surprised what will happen with that. So have a plan. Be comfortable with the word no. Trusting an individual to portray you in the best light, you need to be aware that in most cases, you're going to want these letters to be confidential. You're going to want to waive your rights, so to speak. And Shannon will talk a little bit more about that. But consider that if they don't feel comfortable in doing their best job, that they're going to say no. And don't take it personally. I always tell students, you dodged a bullet. They probably wouldn't have done a good job or wrote you the best letter they could have, because maybe they don't feel that they know you as well. Thank them for their time. Be grateful and have lots of gratitude, because down the road that might change. So maybe you haven't struck up a strong relationship with somebody and you ask them and they say no. And for some reason you don't get in the first time in your application process. Well, maybe you go back to them and you ask them for a letter if you've continued that relationship and maybe it's changed. So come up with other letter writers too, in the inevitability of a no. And I know that sometimes that can be hard. You're like, oh, I just finally came up with one person. But keep in mind that this is a process and that you can start a relationship. It won't be, the expectation is that the relationship doesn't have to last like 6 months to a year. But obviously it's March, and we have March, April, and May for faculty and staff for them to get to know you. And so you have plenty of time to kind of maybe strike up another relationship if you are serious about it. So if you get a no, don't take it too hard. So what do you need to do when you get a yes? Well, you need to thank them up front, right there and there. You need to share with them that you're going to provide them with information at a later date, and that the application process opens when it opens. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the nuts and bolts. So it can really depend on the centralized application service when you're going to be able to provide them with that information. But you do need to tell them that you will be. Have an idea when you want the letter. So kind of share with them within that process of your application when you're going to want the letter. And keep in mind, in most cases, I say most cases because every kind of centralized application service is different. PA students have to have at least 2 of their letters of recommendation in the system before their application gets verified, but medical schools don't care about the letters until secondaries. So you need to keep that in mind in terms of the process. You should indicate who will be providing, that you'll be providing a resume and instructions, and that there might be some emails or links regardless of the request. So when should I ask? Well, that's a great question, and that's built into the application timeline. So for medical schools, the application doesn't open up until May. For dental schools, it doesn't open up until May. For optometry, physical therapy, occupational therapy, it doesn't open up until July. For PA, it technically opens up the end of April, but most students don't submit their applications till about May or June. And so what you need to do is look at your application process. When are you going to be able to submit your primary? Do you need letters to be able to get your application verified? So in the case of PA, like I mentioned, you need a couple of letters before they'll verify, but in the case of med, you don't. When are you verified? So verification typically takes about 10 to 15 business days, depending on the centralized application service. And verification is the first step before a school ever gets your application. And then there are some what we call trafficking rules or processes. So some programs don't allow an initial transmission of anybody's application for like a month. So in the case of medical school like AMCAS and ACOMAS, they don't actually transmit any of the applications until late June. And the soonest anybody can submit is late May. So if you're thinking about this, you're like, gosh, I can give my letter writer a little bit of leeway to give them some time to write the letter. But you can share some really powerful information with them. You could say, hey, I'll keep you up to date, but I plan to submit my application at this point. And when you go to submit, if you need your letters, then you can kind of speak to your letter writers very gently and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm ready to submit my application. And that letter is really important to the process. You'll also want to remember that you really should use the letter writer services. So most of them are free through the centralized application service. A lot of students ask me about Interfolio, which is a way to collect letters of recommendation. It has a lot of really great mechanisms in it where you can waive your rights to see your letters or retain them, and you can have those uploaded by your letter writer. And so for some students who maybe want to get that letter right when they met with they had the instructor, you could use that. The only problem I have with Interfolio personally as an academic advisor is you're already spending a ton of money on the application process to begin with. So using the letter writer service through the centralized application service is free. Interfolio costs you money to have it transmitted. And so my thought process with that is that if you're looking for a cost-effective way, that Interfolio purchase could be another application to a school. So my mindset is that you need to know when you can access the letter writer services and what you can do. So for me, in the process of an application, so if someone's applying this summer, whether they're applying to med or they're applying to occupational therapy, I usually recommend, because of the way our semesters are set up, and not all faculty members actually do summer teaching, so they may not be on the clock, so to speak, or on contract. Professors, I suggest late March. So this is perfect timing. If you know what schools you need and you know who your letter writers are, you should start asking. Keeping in mind that maybe some of the process or some of the information you give them won't come till May. So late March, early April. For practitioners, you can be closer to the application process when you ask, partly because they may have a year-round experience, but you may need to ask them if they're going on vacation and be kind of aware of their timeline so that you can plan accordingly for that. Others, how long have you known the person? You might be able to kind of ask somebody to do it in a pitch. Keep in mind their time is valuable too. A lot of students ask me for letters of recommendation, and I know the process. So I usually base it off of when I'm going to write the letter based off when a student's going to submit their application and be verified, because then I know that the school has the application and they probably are getting secondaries. But I also look at what they're applying to. If they're applying to PA school, that's going to be a little different. If they're applying to PT school, that's going to be a little bit different. So we want students to understand that your timeline is going to affect your letter writers. Don't be too harsh on them. I always tell students, it always makes me chuckle when someone submits a letter request and the deadline, it was like 2 days after they submitted it. And I'm like, what? I don't have time to do what? No. So be thoughtful. Give your letter writers some leeway in a deadline, but don't give them too much. In other words, there are some professors that will wait till the 11th hour to write them. And so if you know that about them, maybe you give yourself a week of wiggle room so that you don't feel like you tell them the deadline, but you want it at a certain point. So what do we provide if they say yes? Shannon.
All right. So if you are so fortunate and lucky and you get someone to say yes, what do you need to provide? First off, resume. Yes, we just discussed that. We didn't bring Kelly in just for funsies. We brought it in to teach you how to build your resume. And the resumes for the medical schools or professional schools are a little different than just your average job. Just watching her video, I learned a lot of things about how to fix my resume. You want to make sure you put your volunteer experiences, any leadership roles that you've had, research opportunities, super important. Medical schools want to know, what are you doing for research, work experience? That kind of shows who you are and what you've done. Hobbies, medical schools, professional schools want to know what you do for fun. Your education, what your major is, your projects you've done, any skills that you've developed, not only through work, but through your volunteer experiences, through community service. What can you do for them? What can your skills provide? And then what are your strengths? They want to know what you're the best at, or what you're best at, and then what those strengths and how you can provide to their institution.
Shannon, would you say that the Career Services Office could be of support in this process? So if a student doesn't have a resume, they could get it started and then they could submit to their letter writers this copy?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that the Career Service Center can do more than just, help you start out your resume. It'll help you continue to build it and make it like super awesome.
What else needs to go into the letter writer packet?
So a personal statement. Not always recommended, and we feel that it should be optional. But there are a few professors when you're asking for your for a letter recommendation that will ask you for this document. They want to know more about you, and personal statements often give hints into your life that a lot of people don't know about. I think Erin has a good example of a personal statement and learning more about a student.
Yeah, so I worked with a student a couple of years ago who was a pre-vet student. So she was getting her application ready to write to be able to apply to vet schools. And I had worked with her pretty closely for the whole entire time she was with us. And she wanted me to write her a letter of recommendation. So I was happy to do that. But I did ask her for a copy of her personal statement. And in her personal statement, she alluded to me that she was actually legally blind, and that she suffered from a disease that caused that. And I was so shocked because it explained oodles and oodles about her in terms of her academic career and why she struggled so hard, which she did, because she wasn't telling anybody about that. She kept it kind of under wraps. And I thought that that was very grateful. I thought that was very resilient. I felt like, gosh, she worked so hard to be where she was. And so when I wrote her letter, those were key points that I put in it. I was like, I have worked with this student over a long period of time, and I was so proud of her for all the work that she'd accomplished. If you looked at her transcripts, you might think, gosh, she's not really a qualified vet candidate. But hearing the reasons behind that were enormously beneficial for me. So the more you know about a person, the better we can write about you. So if you are comfortable sharing your personal statement, you should, especially if it's ready. I would say don't give them a rough draft, give them a polished document.
Okay, sorry, my dogs are about to start barking. So the other documents that you're going to need to provide: forms, AMCAS, and some of the other application services will generate forms for when you enter the letter information into the letter writer service. And then they'll send those information. Sometimes they send that information out to your recommendations or the people you have listed. They have specific forms. They could be electronic or paper, and they want those forms provided in place of the letters that someone may think they need to write. Notice of emails coming at ACOMAS, ASDAS, PTCAS, OTCAS, OptomCAS, FarmCAS will all send the letter writer emails to upload their letters. Make sure that you tell your people who are going to write you the letter of recommendation that these letters are coming. The worst thing in the world would be for someone to get surprised or for it to go to their junk mail and then they don't know about it. And then you never get your letter because you forgot to tell them. Emails are a great way to let your letter writers know. In your timeline, share dates of when you plan to submit your application. Email them when you're verified. And then if letters are not uploaded, share when your schools have to have your applications. Sometimes we need to remember that like our professors and our letter writers are extremely busy people. I know Erin and I have a million of things on our plates, and we just need gentle nudges. Sometimes we're like, hey, this needs to be done this. And if you need to remind us again, that's okay. Retaining your rights or waiving your rights. this is your choice. You can retain your rights to see your letters, or you can waive the rights. We recommend waiving your rights. A lot of times, medical schools and professional schools use your letters as another option. Like if you have a ties between students and getting a place, they'll use these letters to guarantee your spot or give you, more of a chance. If they see that you retained your rights, they may look at that like you're doing something kind of shady or that you're coaching their letter writing. But by waiving your rights, they don't know. They know that you don't know what's in that letter, and that's a far better option. And it just really keeps your what's the word I'm looking for?
Keeps your letters in a good, strong position.
Yes, thank you.
At the end of the day, though, it maybe doesn't have that huge amount of bearing, but it's just been our experience that we want you to waive your rights. I would also add on Chan's behalf. So the reason we want you to tell your letter writers that you are waiving your rights, if you've decided to do that, is that they will put in their letter writing that they're writing a confidential letter. And so that sends them down the rabbit hole when they're reading the letter at the committees. They'll say, gosh, this person doesn't know what the letter writer said about them because we read it as a confidential letter. So that's key for our letter writers to know that. All right, next steps and tips. So, how many times did I say thank them today? So I personally feel that handwritten thank yous are a lost art. And I can't tell you how many times I have saved every single thank you letter I have ever, thank you card or thank you letter I have gotten from one of my students. It doesn't just make me feel good. I think gratitude and being grateful for assistance is a huge part of this process. The more kindness that you can exude from your process, the more willingness that they are to support you a second time, right? So you ask somebody to write you a letter and you never thanked them, never. And then you don't get into medical school and you have to go ask them again. That might cause some questions for them. They're like, gosh, they really didn't seem like they appreciated me. So even if it's verbal, that's fine. But I believe in handwritten thank yous. I think they're fabulous. And if you are not one to write things by hand, like you have atrocious handwriting, Postable.com is an amazing application and company. So they are a website and you can pick the card you want to use. You can use a thank you card. They have get well cards, birthday cards. You can change the font to fit your style of writing so it looks like your handwriting, or you can have it look like somebody else's glossy handwriting, or you can have it look like a kid wrote it. Don't do that for the professional thank yous, please. But Postable.com will mail it to the address. They will print it and they'll put it in an envelope and stamp it. So you could actually, as you're sending out the requests to the emails, you can even time it. So you can actually tell it when you want it delivered. So like you could deliver it like May 31st after you've requested the letter, and you can thank them. You can email them and share a thank you. You can also share to them about your progress. Gosh, it's so helpful for us as letter writers to hear you're doing it, right? That you're filling out your secondaries and you're getting interviews and your acceptances. And I know it's hard as students to admit that maybe it didn't go so well or it didn't happen this year, but we're involved in it. If we've said yes to writing you a letter, we believe in you too. So we want to be able to encourage you and be able to put you through the next step. And I can't tell you how many times it's happened that somebody hasn't told me that they either got accepted or that they didn't. And I'm kind of left going, I wonder what's going on. And so then it's not until that time when they're writing the letter that they're needing it again that I find out that it didn't go so well. So think about that. Think about the thank you and how important it is. Don't leave it behind. Do we have any questions for tonight?
So Erin, on the thank you letter, how long do you suggest? Maybe do you think they should put in all of this information, or should it just be like hey, great, thank you so much for your help?
No, I think thanking them for the help, or even if it's just one sentence, I think that's enough. I think it's the effort of actually putting the thank you out there. And just keep in mind, an email can be easily typed. So that's why I like handwritten cards, because then you're only given that small space to write in. And so the obligation isn't that you had to write a big, huge thing. It's that you wrote a concise thing that said you were thankful. An email, you might be able to get a little bit more information in there. Some of our students that get accepted, they're really excited. And so they put a ton of information in, and I love that information. It's so useful. But at the same token, the students who don't get in, I want to reach out to them. I want to meet with them and see if I can help them with the second go around. So I think it depends on the modality that you use. If you're doing an in-person thank you and you only have a few minutes, then that's fine. But I always encourage students to follow it up with a handwritten card. I think that those are great. Other questions? Was this information useful for you today?
I think the information that we provided is super amazing. I don't know if it matters what I think, but
All right.
I'm proud of us.
Fine. All right, let me stop the recording.